So we're going to go through and talk about a few things. We're going to kick it off and talk about Flack Global Metals and Fabral and how the businesses that we are doing and working together are providing a lot of value for ourselves and then for our extended customer bases. Okay. So Daniel will walk through the market structure of it, and I will talk about the applicability of it and how it worked with Fabral. Okay. So Daniel, kick things off.
There we go. Okay, so we'll have a kind of broad macro view to start. It's important to recognize that even though the industrial side of the economy is 30% of the economy, there's another 70, right? And it really does impact what's going on the industrial side. So we'll look at overall macro, and then spend a lot of time talking about the supply dynamics, the steel supply dynamics in the U.S. specifically, and also look at, obviously the fact of the matter is the global market is also impacting us pretty significantly. So we'll talk about that as well. And then finally touch a little bit on construction demand, look at, the overall macro trend of how things have been going. And then I'll hand it back over to Dennis to take it from there. So the best way to talk about the overall macroeconomy is to take a quick snapshot on what's going on with GDP. Now we do webinars, we do webcasts, and it always seems like we time it on the day that GDP is going to be announced. This happened again today, so a little bit of anxiety. Who knows how it's really going to be coming out. The fact of the matter is that even though the slide is not showing you, there we go. Okay, so here's the overall picture of GDP, the growth that's happening in the U.S. economy. We have the red lines, which hit recessions. We start back in 2000, you see a pretty even pace of growth in the U.S. economy, and then following the pandemic, what we've seen is nothing short of incredible. The pace of growth that's been happening since the pandemic, the recovery from the pandemic, really does show very clear that the United States is the envy of the world. It's the best in class, and the economy really has continued to beat expectations and be impressive. When we look at some of the underlying components, so we'll dig into the next slide, where we see the breakdown of what's kind of driving GDP. Okay, so the thing I want to focus in here specifically on is going to be the blue line. That's personal consumption. So consumption is really very clearly what has been driving activity going forward. On the industrial side, it's disingenuous to say that it's been easy times over the last 18 months. Interest rates have really impacted activity, have really kind of put a lid on kind of what's going on. Opportunities clearly are there, but it is not nearly as simple or as easy as business was immediately following that recovery. Again, consumption continues to outperform. The consumer in the U.S. remains incredibly strong. If you look at any of the measures, you'll see things like record high credit card debt. You'll see things like really high debt levels. But when you account for wealth that's been created, when you account for incomes that have grown, when you account for the other side of the equation, we're at very healthy levels, and it shows very clearly that there's a long run for activity in the near run on the U.S. economy. Moving on to the next one here, the other component that really matters is going to be the labor market when we're talking about the United States. This is going to be jobs added. So this is the non-farm payrolls. The reason we use non-farm payrolls is because the United States obviously is no longer primarily an agricultural country. So what we can see here, I'll point you to a few things specifically. So the yellow dashed line is going to be the 6-month moving average of how many jobs are being added in the United States. The white line is the best estimate that economists have kind of universally. It is consensus for what what a healthy economy, kind of continued growth levels would show. So you can see the volatility that's obviously going on, but when we look at the underlying trend in the labor market, we're moving well above potential, and it frankly needs to cool down. We saw incredible levels of consumption, consumer spending earlier in the pandemic recovery that led to record high levels of inflation, 30-year levels of inflation. We will have a few questions, so I would love to really go deep into the different kinds of household surveys versus infrastructure surveys. The short answer is that a short level of undocumented workers are accounted for in here. It's very very little level. There's a lot of back testing, a lot of studying to ensure that these numbers are jobs that are added. That's the data set that we're looking at. So there's a lot of other ways that you can look at the labor market, which account for different dynamics that are happening. But yeah, so this is payrolls. When you look at other things, when you look at job openings, they're still at pre-pandemic levels. So they were incredibly high. They've come down. They're above pre-pandemic levels. When you look at initial jobless claims, continuing jobless claims, they're at incredibly healthy levels. They're well below kind of what we had been seeing in 2017, 18, 19. And then when you look at job cuts, layoffs, all of those levels are really suppressed. The labor market, by all measures, universally is quite healthy. Even we did have another data point released today. The ADP, so the employment company that measures employment, they had their highest level since March of 2023. So more than a year and a half, highest level. So we continue to add jobs. Unemployment rate remains incredibly low as well. From there, so we have the bigger picture view on kind of what's going on in the underlying economy. We'll look at here domestic production. So this is domestic steel production. This is raw steel production. It's sheet. It's also longs and structural. What we can see here when we look at the chart on the bottom, it gives you a bigger picture view of kind of what has been going on throughout this period and going in even beyond here. We've seen pretty incredible industry consolidation. The way that we see it now, essentially, really since 2020, there are 4 major producers. It's consolidated very heavily, and their power and their ability has also exponentially increased because of that. So we'll look at the top chart here. It zooms in a little bit. This is from 2020 on. The other component that's also been happening during that time of consolidation has been a ton of investment. So it's factually known that the U.S. steel production is the greenest in the world. It's the cleanest in the world. It's the best in the world. It's made the most responsibly in the world. And that is because of EAF production. So it's a technology that was brought in, that was developed in the United States. It's spread globally, but we lead the world in the amount of EAF production in the domestic market makeup. It's more than 70% of the United States production. And because of that, the unique thing that they're able to do because of that is they're able to throttle on and off how much is being produced in a way that blast furnace production, BOF production, really is not able to. As soon as they flip the switch, it has to keep running. It leads to significant levels of surpluses and shortages. What domestic producers are able to do now is really highlighted in the data that we see in the smaller chart, and here more recently, they can cut on the flip of a switch. We saw an incredible cut of production over the last couple of weeks in a way that we had only seen in periods of 2020 or 2008. Their ability to recognize that, okay, demand's a little bit softer, we can pull back, we can kind of stop the bleed of what's going on with prices in a way that we didn't have to do price announcements, or we didn't have to do kind of desperate events, desperate acts to really just stop to try to shake the market. We can actually play with the dynamics of what's going on with supply and demand. So that's a unique part of the market. The real takeaway when you kind of have a full picture of what's going on here, volatility is really going to be a high risk going forward. We've felt it since 2020. We've seen $2,000 hot roll bans. We've a lot of people thought, okay, well, that's over. Now we're just going to be seeing, back to normal, 600 bans. That was the long run average, $620 for the 20 years before, the pandemic. Since then, none of the indexes have hit 600 from there. So the long run average prior to the pandemic hasn't even been hit as a bottom. So this is an entirely unique market that we're going into, where there's no doubt that volatility is going to be a significant factor for what's going on going forward. So here, this is going to be imports. So this is what's the impact on the global market, specifically in the United States. What we've also shown here, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, is our internal FGM forecast supply and demand model. So we've built a model that essentially takes the domestic market It takes global prices, it takes all the dynamics of kind of what's going on and what should the impact be on the US market is the yellow line. So what we can also see here, two red circles. Also, I don't think I introed the actual white line. That's actual arrivals. So we have a forward look, a forecast on the internal forecast. We have the red circles, which show here. These were following the pandemic, which you can see actual arrivals came in well below what the market expected. Prices rocket higher. That was one situation. Now we have these two scenarios here as well. Those are the other two significant rallies that we've seen more recently. The market is expecting this level of arrivals. Mills are able to kind of pull back production. The global market doesn't fill that hole, and the price pops. So this is a pretty clear takeaway, a pretty good forecast of kind of what's going on here. When we look to maybe some of the dynamics that are impacting the market now, we've obviously seen a steady grind lower on prices. This is a pretty big problem. What we're seeing here, we're seeing arrivals are coming in just below that May spike when the market was expecting lower levels. And there's no surprise there that then trade cases start coming out. What we're seeing in the flare up on imports at the end of the chart here is that arrivals from specifically Vietnam and also Taiwan are coming in well above where the market says that they should be. It makes a lot of sense then that obviously the domestic producers and the steelworkers union then brought forward a trade case to try to suppress that dumping that's occurring. But let's think about why that dumping is maybe happening. It's a lot of people talk about that the fact that there's overcapacity globally. When you look at different regions, the amount of material that's planned to be coming online in the next coming years really is nothing to balk at. It's quite incredible. An example, specifically the ASEAN region. So that's going to be Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia. All of the countries there over the next 10 years are planning to bring on more than 100 million tons. The U.S. produces 80,000 tons, or 80 million tons, I'm sorry. So they're bringing on 100 million tons in the next 10 years, which is more than the U.S. domestic production. So the impact of that, obviously some of it is going to be taken up by their market as their market develops, as they invest in their own infrastructure. But the fact of the matter is that if market dynamics don't benefit them, if there's any kind of issue that's going on in their domestic market, the easy solution, quote unquote easy solution for them, is to just dump it into the global market. The biggest perpetrator of that is going to be China. So what we're looking at here is Chinese steel exports going back to 2010. I want to draw your attention to this period first, and then we can talk about the similarities of why we're seeing such a run up in exports now in the Chinese market. So 2015, 2016, anyone that was looking at global markets was hearing about the absolute calamity that is the Chinese property sector. Their domestic consumption really fell off of a cliff. And the ripple effect globally on global markets was very significant. But on the steel market specifically, they flooded the world with steel. A couple of years later, 2018, what is the consequence of this flooding? We put the 232 tariffs. In the US market, Chinese steel, flat rolled steel, does not come ashore because of the 232 tariffs. Where is it going now is the question. We're seeing that their property sector, again, is in real dire straits. They're doing everything that they can. They're attempting to stimulate. They're also attempting to change their market so that it's not as reliant on the property sector, but they still have all of the steel production that is that needs to continue to produce, continue to pump. It's the largest part of their economy, one of the major contributing factors to economic growth. So their property sector, again, is not in good shape. We're seeing a huge surge of imports. If that material is not coming to the United States, where is that material going? Their neighbors would be the ASEAN region, would be Korea, would be Vietnam, would be Taiwan. Where is material coming to the United States now? Vietnam, Taiwan. It's a clear indication that there's a pass-through effect of what's going on. China is putting the material into the world. Vietnam, Taiwan, many countries there are benefiting from that very inexpensive material. They're producing their material. They're selling it at just a little bit of a higher price into the US market. They're flooding the US market with imports and really causing a lot of problems from not from quality perspective as in they're producing bad steel, but a quality perspective as in it's predominantly blast furnace. It's really, there's really high levels of carbon production that are happening. The main takeaway when we look at this though is the fact of the matter is that in the global economy right now, industrial demand is suppressed and China is flooding the world with material. So it is something, quite frankly, that's cause for the concern. What we are seeing on the other side, though, is that the U.S. government is really taking it seriously. They're really making a best effort to identify it ahead of time. What we saw a couple of weeks ago now was essentially the rubber stamp from the trade case that was brought forward. It's going to be investigated further. There likely is going to be an impact. Exactly what it's going to be, we'll have to wait and see. There is actually a pretty long gestation period before the final decision is actually going to be made, or before it needs to be made. So we'll have to see, where it all goes from there. But gives you an overview kind of on supply. And then from here, we'll just kind of briefly look at construction spending, some of the trends that we're seeing. And then again, I'll hand it back over to Dennis. And we would love to kind of hit your questions there more. And I would love to talk more about unemployment as well over at the booth at Flack Global Metals. So here's what we're seeing on construction spending. Very clearly, we'll kind of start top down, right? So the white line here is total, seasonally adjusted construction spending. That's on a separate axis. So some of the volatility you're seeing, it's essentially all of these components added up. Then we'll go through the rest of them. So orangey red is residential spending. Blue is going to be non-residential spending. And then in yellow, finally, we have public spending, so government spending. You can think of that as the CHIPS Act, Infrastructure Act, Inflation Reduction Act. You can very clearly see, obviously, that as those went into law, public spending started to increase. As an aside, we really haven't seen the uptake that the market maybe anticipated immediately from those bills. The good thing for the long run, maybe the bad thing for what's been going on more recently, but the good thing for the long run is that the way that those funds are being doled out is quite responsible. There's quite a thorough process for how you are able to get those funds. So what that means is that they're going to be available for a longer time, and there's going to be a bit of a safety net on the construction industry because of that for a longer period of time. So that's one encouraging thing to kind of think about as we maybe look at some of the volatility that's going on in the private sector. So again, residential spending, let's look right here. Here is April, residential spending peaks in April of 22. What happened in March of 22? Interest rates started going up. So you see a very clear relation with the Fed raising interest rates, residential spending starting to immediately roll over. And then what's been surprising the market on the residential side specifically is that the internal dynamics of we don't have enough homes. There's currently a $4 million home shortage in the United States. That again is something very encouraging for the long run outlook on the residential side. There are other issues like permitting and affordability, which are also hampering that. But it gives a really good long run for the residential side, a significant backlog full of opportunity. But then what we'll look at on the non-residential side, there's a relationship, and it's one of the strongest relationships. I'm an economist, right? All day long, I'm looking at numbers. I'm trying to find relationships, trying to find some kind of insight. One of the strongest relationships that we see in all the industrial side of the economy is the residential to non-residential side of the market. You can see it here. It's about 18 months to 2 years. Residential peaks, non-residential keeps running up, rolls over about 2 years later. You can see it here, hampered over a little bit of a shorter time period. But when we kind of do the timing there, on the residential side, we saw the peak and rollover We're about 2 years beyond that, a little bit over 2 years beyond that. So, quite frankly, when you think about what that means on the non-residential side, we're likely in for an outlook or an environment where you're going to have to work a little bit harder to get the jobs. You're probably going to have to, you know, they're going to be taking the best bids, the best opportunities. You're really going to have to cut on margins to get the work, and that's an increased risk when we're in this kind of steel environment where volatility is not going away. So with that, now that we've kind of set the stage a little bit more, I'll hand it over to Dennis. Let him take it from there.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So I get the time to spend with Daniel a lot. It's fantastic. I mean, the things he puts up there and talks about with depth are incredible. So, this slide. I kind of want to talk about what was going on with metal roofing and how, when you take a look at this slide, it's great for us, everybody in this room. So for us, when you take a look at how the compound annual growth rate is going to continue to extend into 2030 by about 5% annually, that's fantastic. So my career is bifurcated into kind of two worlds. One is the masonry world, and the other is the metals world. I would tell you, if I put you up a brick industry chart, it does not look like that. So brick is coming off the wall in droves. They're trying to figure out a way to get that turned around. Here, it's not happening. So for us, what it's all about is how do we collectively work together? And my conversations with you guys will be, we're in a great time, right? There's a lot of things going on. That construction spending is moving in the right direction. The health of the U.S. is good. And for us to participate and get more metal used away from other materials helps everyone. So when I explain the supply chain in my business to a lot of people in other industries, I talk about I have to take a 16-week supply chain and make it basically ready within 48 hours for my customer base. So that's the complexity of getting all of the SKUs, the substrates, and all those things together. And then we haven't even talked about pricing. So I've led for Fabral twice. I led it between 2016 and 2019. So if you go back through there, we thought that this was a really tough time period. I left during 2020 and 2021, where it just astronomically went through. At that time, I was a masonry contractor. My world was completely different. It was really around how do I keep my guys going, right? My bids and my guys going, and how do I manage all costs? The costs in the cement world were not nearly of what was going on in the metal space. But that difficulty as we come back is really manifested itself. So when we look at this, when you're talking about just only the complexity of it, we talk about it two things. One, the white, just so we can just, is the spot price, and then the spread and the adders are below. You can see that they don't time out together in any way. So what goes on is that you may think, based on what's going on in the CRU, the hot roll price, what's moving there, it may not move as naturally as you think, or what you buy. So as we want to go through it, we talked about a lot of things. What's our total cost of ownership of the adders and interest expense? Because as we talked about, what's the big change, right, around interest rates? Steel that used to cost us 2 or 3% is now costing us 7%. Massive difference for us overall, right? Just bringing it all in because you're going to buy it and hold it. It doesn't really make the best decision. So the timing of when that's going to arrive. And then historically, prices have gone up faster, 66% than they've gone down. Things that we've been thinking about as we're going through this. So really difficult overall. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about Fabral. So just a quick thing. So Flack Global Metals came, Jeremy Flack came, and we were talking about the ownership structure that was going to start to take place. Do you want to come back and buy the business? And we're going to come in and we're going to buy the business in January of 2023. We don't close on the business until March of 2023. So if you're buying a business, how well are they typically positioned? Not usually well. Okay? So 2023 was an interesting year for us. And I think it was a great year for us in a lot of ways. Because when you sit there and when our input cost came in at this point, we really had to go back and look at everything we did to make sure that we exhaustively looked at what we were doing, what were we buying, was it available, and we went to all of our suppliers on all aspects to try to get us to help. We were in a lot of exotic products. Our supply chain was not well understood. And as we started working back up and to our customers around what their needs really were and what the market and mills really wanted to make, As you sit there and sometimes you go, well, the mill would make it. Well, we found that we were getting stockouts on products constantly because the mills didn't. That wasn't what they wanted to make. That was something they would make at the end if they didn't have a whole lot of things going on, right? But that didn't. They didn't know how the effect was for us. Or we could go buy a lot and sit on it, but now interest expenses just that's more than doubled. So for our standpoint, how did we go look at it? It was the perfect time for us to reset our business. So what we did was, we reset our girths, we set our substrates, our colors, everything is basically changed in an 18-month period for Fabral. And I would just tell you that, it all became from the help of our supply chain members. Talk to the mills, the coders, everyone, because it wasn't just the underlying, hey, we can get you this. We need to be expanded around, well, how is it going to get there? What port does it come through? You see our facilities, and really got granular in the details around what was going on. That was the key for us to really make sure we could get through this time frame of year one. So our first 12 months were fun. That's not why I'm here now. The nose is fine now, but it was different. But what we did too, as we're going through it, is the segment and construction cycles were important as we looked at it. As we work with our customers, and our customers have these contracts, as I was telling you, I was a contractor in 2020. My problem is I got in a point where I almost had to have force majeure to get out of builder contracts because I was locked in for 3 months or 6 months in 2020, and I couldn't take it on, right? Labor's up 30%, products up 10%. What are we going to go do next? So how do we go manage that and put my business at risk was a major thing that we worked ourselves through during that time frame. And all while I had a commercial business, that was the same thing. I had contracts that were 2 years long. We were going to go build a 5-mile wall for a county. How was that going to take place? Those were the real things that happened on that side, and it was not nearly to what was going on in the metals world. So from that, understand our construction cycles. What do we have to agree to? What do our customers need so that we can fold in and create the right best practices with them as we go out to purchase these things and tie ourselves together and make sure there's certainty through that. The major thing for me is always have the things and be predictable and reliable and make sure you do it at the best overall price. So this is where we started getting into the real details and our ability to go do that. So when you take a look at it, I think as Daniel was going through things, if you look at pre-2020, you're looking at 15% of kind of a change that was going on. Post-2020, it's more than doubled. So what we kind of spent all our time looking at is we can't sit there and forecast what's going to go out there and happen. But what we do is we really know now is what we're buying. We have a wide base of customers now that we work with to make sure that we're buying the products that are readily available, where we understand the supply chain. So if something happens at a port that was just going on or things that happen, we can pivot. And then we work downstream with our customers to make sure that we create the right relationship with them, that we're talking to them about the same things of what they're trying to accomplish. The volatility is going to be there. For our industry, when you look at it, clay, concrete, asphalt roofing, those things, they don't have this. They don't have this problem of availability. They don't have this problem of pricing and delivery. So from that, that's where we can set ourselves apart going forward. I want to see our industry continue to grow faster. All boats will rise. So from that standpoint, we need to figure out how do we go do that. And I think, you can talk about what we've done here, and happy to walk you through what we did specifically, because there's some products that I was surprised at. And our team can talk to you about that if you're in those things. And then the FGM group can really talk to you about what they do and looking out on the forward curve and how they look at and mitigate through hedging practices to take off risk.
So I'll just jump in and kind of do a little bit of a wrap up. So again, the points that we really want to make sure are very clear. Overall, macroeconomic conditions in the United States are the best in class. They are the envy of the world. What the implications are for the industrial side potentially, it's going to mean that this interest rate cutting cycle that everyone is continuing to chomp at the bits waiting for. If the U.S. economy continues to grow and expand, we're not going to see interest rate cuts in the way that a lot of the people in the market are anticipating. So that's something that definitely needs to be aware of as a secondary risk. Outside of that, Dennis looked at some of the steel charts. Steel volatility is not going away. It's here to stay. The market has fundamentally changed from the way that it was before the pandemic. EAF production, global production, the ramp up in overcapacity, trade cases, and a really impressive outlook for underlying industrial demand going forward is going to lead to significant swings in volatility. And in the metals industry, as Dennis highlighted, is really positioned for continued growth. From there, I would love to take some questions. I'm actually not sure how much time we have, but if we're not able to get to your question specifically, Flack Global Metals is going to be, our booth is going to be straight back by the entrance. Then Fabral is going to be right in the middle, the diamond right in the middle there. And the other kind of housekeeping thing, for any survey suggestions, we have a QR code just around the corner there. METALCON, make sure that we plug that if you have any suggestions for kind of what you guys want to be seeing in the future. So questions? Yes. Yeah, of course. So the question was around trade case resolution. How long it's potentially going to take. The fact of the matter is that the important step kind of has happened. The government recognized, they gave the rubber stamp towards the petition that we are going to investigate further. Looking, more into when we're going to see an answer, the government has one full calendar year from when they rubber stamp to when a decision has to be made. Now, this was something similar that happened with 232. There was a full year period, I believe it was September of 17, when the rubber stamp came, but then it wasn't a full year. It was March when it happened, when the actual 232 was announced and it was put into place with little warning. In this scenario, it's likely that we'll see a little bit more warning coming down the pike. But the fact of the matter is, there's an extended period. It's going to happen. We don't know exactly, but we'll have insight. It won't just crop up overnight. I'm sorry.
I'm seeing the rise in domestic steel prices, even as we speak now. U.S. steel is now $8 a ton. What is everybody else about?
Yeah. So the question was, essentially in response to my answer, even though we don't have a very near term, like the trade cases are going to happen tomorrow, we're already starting to see, the mills, push towards higher prices. You noted U.S. Steel with their price announcement. Nucor's CSP also went from 720 to 740. Not necessarily following, but coincidences are rare. Is that? And Cliff's 750. Yeah, thank you. So very clearly, domestic producers are they've had 9 months, 10 months of lower prices of everything cutting in. Obviously, they're going to want to push prices higher. It is going to be supply and demand at the end of the day. But what I think the most important takeaway is that when we think about what's going to happen to domestic prices because of the trade cases, obviously less supply is going to lead to higher prices. So if global materials being blocked, higher prices domestically is going to be the case. We did a lot of analysis on 232 as well, and what the impact of 232 was. We saw that for the 2 years following 232, given where kind of supply and demand dynamics would have suggested, the domestic price was about 21% higher than it would have been normally. So 25% tariff, 20% higher in domestic prices. That's definitely a clear relationship there.
What impact do you see in the presidential election on how the results be? Steel market and everything to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, presidential election, what impact do you see? Quite frankly, I think the underlying view in the most reasonable view is that business is going to find a way regardless of outcome. But I don't want to just leave it at that. There are some specifics that we can kind of talk through a little bit here. I'll start with Vice President Harris. Although she hasn't really come forward with a lot of policies at this point, which obviously would make sense if you think about the fact that her campaign is much more abbreviated than a typical presidential campaign. One of the things that's very interesting for the industrial side is the pledge for 3 million homes. So I referenced earlier a deficit of 4 million. The pledge for 3 million. Even if that it doesn't get us all the way to where we need to be, even if it doesn't really move the needle, especially what's more important is kind of under the surface of that, where the officials that would be in the government have already noted that means kind of changing the red tape and changing the permitting and doing the things that have long needed to happen to actually facilitate builders to build and to fill that deficit. So that's one thing to point to that could definitely be beneficial on the industrial side. When you think about a second Trump presidency, I think that you have to start with the fact of tax cuts, obviously encouraging more activity. Not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but when we think about the risk to the overall economy, we think about interest rates, we think about the impact of potential tax cuts. That is going to be pretty inflationary in a time when the Federal Reserve is trying to tamper down activity to get inflation fully in the bag. Any kind of real rev up is going to fly in the face of all of the progress that had been made. So that is a risk to the upside. That is a risk to higher inflation. That is a pretty significant risk that wouldn't immediately be felt. There could definitely be an immediate impact that would be positive there. But outside of that, blanket tariff of 10% is also extremely inflationary. It's building homes. Building homes is not. If you increase supply, you reduce price. If home prices are increasing, if you don't have enough homes, then the price for homes is going to increase. If you increase the number of homes, the price of homes is going to decrease. There are other dynamics, of course, that need to be considered. It's not a simple answer, but the fact of the matter is that activity on the other side of the election is going to be really impressive. We're seeing it universally in all of the surveys that are happening. Everyone is talking about a post-pandemic bump, and that's something that as an industrial industry, we're definitely looking forward to. So.
So your product seems the cost of it seems pretty metal intensive, and you both showed a bunch of volatility in the past, and probably it's going to come. That's going to affect the price of your product. What do you do about that? How do you insure yourself later? Do you just let it rip, or what do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, the question really is so when you look at the volatility coming at us and what we're going to go do with that, knowing it's coming is, it's not just go let it rip, right? It's how are we looking out there and looking out to the forward curve? What do we see coming at us and trying not to use, we've cut about a little bit internally is don't use a floating index price on a fixed product, right? It's how do we work with our customers to look out what are they going to be consistently in? What will we consistently in? How do we take out a lot of the peaks and valleys of this and just make it more durable by, how do we position ourselves and not look just in a linear lens of this trade today, what are we getting done? You got to look over the life of that relationship you're going to have with that customer. And that's what we're trying to spend a lot more time with is locking ourselves in with our customers going forward, not just doing a deal. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. That's good. Well, thank you all. Really appreciate you guys coming out. Thank you for taking the time. Any questions, please come to the FGM booth, the Fabral booth. We'd love to talk about things more. One person knocked.